never breaks good news, whether it's COVID or military defeat or anything. He just lets other people take the blame and just announces the good news. And he has none.
Well, Vladimir Putin has been meeting with his military chiefs, discussing Russia's next moves as they launch another wave of missiles at Ukrainian infrastructure. Rumours have been circulating about the health and well-being of the president, as he's been out of the public eye, even missing his traditional red square ice hockey match. Before the show, I spoke with Owen Matthews. He's a writer, historian, and a former Moscow bureau chief for Newsweek. I began by asking him what he feels might be behind Putin's absence.
I think it's pretty obvious why. He doesn't want to answer any awkward questions. And although his sort of marathon press conferences, at which I've been at several, and they're actually pretty impressive performances, I have to say, he's very much on message, or has been in the past, and fields questions, and not all of them completely planted, and not all of them completely softballs. So they couldn't this year find a way of shielding him from those kind of possible awkward questioning, and therefore his Kremlin spin doctors decided to pull on the plug on it and maintain Vladimir Putin's status as Mr. Good News, and that has been a trademark of his career all the way through. He never breaks good news, whether it's COVID or military defeat or anything. He just lets other people take the blame and just announces the good news. And he has none.
Yes, he never gives bad news. How does he still remain being seen as someone powerful, as this sort of great conveyor of good news if he doesn't show up?
Well, I think his propaganda machine does that for him. He doesn't show up to the live press conference, but for the vast majority of Russians, he will nonetheless be very present in their sort of televisual lives, because whether it's actually the news of the day, whether he visited this factory or had held that meeting, Putin is always unfailingly one of the top three, usually number one slot. What did Vladimir Putin do today? And that's been the case for years and decades now. So I think most people won't in fact notice, most Russian television viewers will not notice that that press conference has been missed. He's still going to be on television screens, even if he's not actually appearing in public in person.
Does it show he's under pressure, though? Presumably it does.
Certainly, it shows that he's under pressure. I mean, there's been several moments of where Putin's the carapace of everything being under control in Ukraine and the war going well has cracked. The most significant the first and most significant one was on September 21st, when he had to announce that partial mobilization, which he definitely didn't want to do. He wanted to keep this war as a limited military operation, so he didn't want to scare people, and he was forced, because of, he's come under such pressure in the field, to announce that mobilization back in September. Then again, the Crimea bridge attack, that was basically impossible to cover up. And now again, the Kherson defeat, they have spun it, the retreat from Kherson last month, as an orderly withdrawal, a repositioning of the front lines and so on. But the bad news keeps coming.
Do you think that there's anything in reports about his ill health that could be an explainer for why he hasn't shown up to some of these things? I mean, obviously we've heard, haven't we, that he's been seen by a cancer specialist 35 times in 4 years. There's lots of talk about his ill health. He was, of course, increasingly paranoid about getting COVID. Would that be a reason for his increasing absence?
Well, it's extremely hard to tell, but it's not just the appointments of this cancer specialist. And in fact, I think it's very many more than you suggest. I mean, he's clearly spent up to 135 days with cancer specialists since 2017, and he, according to Oliver Stone, who is, I suppose, is the Western, the filmmaker Oliver Stone made several documentaries with Vladimir Putin personally. He said earlier this year, that he'd heard that Vladimir Putin had, quote unquote, cancer back in 2017 and licked it, according to Oliver Stone. Well, the truth is that we don't know, but we do have evidence that sort of shaky right arm, which we often see, gripping a table, or actually
Yes.
sort of shaking when he's going to see Alexander Lukashenko. I mean, there is, doctors who've seen that footage say, maybe something like Parkinson's. But again, we don't know, and of course, it's possible that that he may be gravely ill. But when he does appear, hitherto, he has actually scotched those rumours and actually appeared quite vigorous and fit. In fact, as the CIA director Bill Burns said back in August when he had a joint press conference with the chief of MI6. He said that, unfortunately, Putin looks, all too well. And so far, we, haven't really seen anything, clear indication of Putin looking unwell. But then, of course, we wouldn't, would we? Because he would conceal that from us.
The story that is being discussed widely at the moment is this fragile morale in Russia. There are even talk of them getting musicians to sort of try and boost morale. Is that the sense you're getting? That, I mean, this is from the UK Ministry of Defence saying in his latest defence intelligence update on the situation, it seemed to be that there's a significant vulnerability across the Russian forces. Do you get that sense from talking to people?
Yes, I mean, I think it's entirely credible that the Russian forces in the field are experiencing low morale. The question is, to what extent does that low morale actually translate into low morale at home or any kind of political crisis? Because I think it's entirely understandable that an army that's being defeated has low morale, and the Russian sort of tragicomically ridiculous answer to that has been to mobilize troops with accordions to cheer up the troops like it's 1942. I mean, there's a sort of element of grim absurdity to the Russian army's reaction. But the key important part in the endgame of this war is at what point does Russian defeat or does Ukrainian advance turn into a sort of tipping point for Russian forces on the ground? How much punishment can they stand? And again, unfortunately, I mean, I don't think we have any real indication that we've reached that kind of point, if only because for instance, in the hottest part of the front line, which has been the most intense battle over the last 6 weeks, after the fall of Kherson, and even before, was around Bakhmut. So the Russians are trying to advance, actually. Ever since they retreated from Kherson, they transferred troops to the front line in Donbass, and there they have been pushing to actually secure some kind of victory, to change the vector of war, to at least take this, frankly, strategically insignificant small town of Bakhmut, and they're still pounding it and they're still throwing people at it. So I don't think there's any sign so far of a catastrophic, critical collapse in Russian morale, but not simply because they're actually on the offensive at the moment.
And does that get reflected back home amongst the people within Russia? There's not this tipping point heading towards it for people back home, for the mothers of sons and the wives of husbands who are fighting. What about their morale?
Well, let me put it this way. I last left Moscow about 6-7 weeks ago, and I was there for the mobilization in the end of September, and I was there until the middle of October. And weirdly, the most extraordinary thing about Moscow is that Moscow has not noticed that there is a war on, really. There's just no indication whatsoever, or very little, that you are in the capital of a country that's fighting the biggest war of the 21st century. That's the most striking takeaway. And after the mobilization, things changed a little bit. There was some panic. Some people, but started to worry about their sons, that might be sent to the front line. The parents of young men who had done military service, who were the ones that were subject to this partial mobilization, were somewhat worried. And we saw in the aftermath of that, some protests in unexpected places. I mean, not in the streets of Moscow and St. Petersburg, but on the streets of Dagestan, streets of various Siberian towns, of mothers and so on. But since then, that sort of rather small, but potentially dangerous and significant, but nonetheless small wave of protests after mobilization have fizzled out. And we have not seen a repeat of that yet.
Well, that was the writer, historian, and former Moscow bureau chief for Newsweek, Owen Matthews, talking to me a little earlier.